Alice sat quietly in the corner of the small kitchen, her knees pulled close to her chest. The sound of laughter from the living room made her heart ache. Her uncle's family, Uncle James, Auntie Mabel, and her cousins, John and Judith, were celebrating Judith's birthday with a big cake and plenty of gifts. Alice wasn't invited. The kitchen was small and stuffy, with peeling paint on the walls. A single bulb flickered above, casting shadows on the cracked floor. The smell of fried chicken and cake filled the air, but Alice knew she wouldn't be given any. She was only allowed to eat after everyone else had finished, and even then, only if there were leftovers. Alice was 10 years old when her parents died in a car accident. Since then, she had lived with her uncle's family. They lived in a comfortable house in the city, with 3 bedrooms, a small living room, and a kitchen. Her uncle owned a large shop in the market that sold expensive imported goods like rice, sugar, and canned foods. He made enough money to take care of the family, but Alice was never treated like part of it. At first, she had hoped they would love her like their own. But Auntie Mabel always gave her the hardest chores, washing clothes by hand, scrubbing the floors, and cooking meals, while Judith and John played outside or watched TV. "Alice, come and clean this mess!" Auntie Mabel's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Alice quickly stood up and walked into the living room. Judith had spilled juice on the floor, but instead of cleaning it herself, she pointed at Alice. "She should do it. It's her job anyway." John and Judith, her cousins, enjoyed making Alice's life difficult. They would lie about Alice just to get her in trouble with their father and then mock her. Uncle James would never question his children, but instead punish or scold Alice without hearing her out. Judith was tall for her age, with long braided hair and a smug smile. She always wore nice clothes and had shiny shoes, while Alice wore old, faded dresses that were too big for her. She enjoyed ordering Alice the most. Alice knelt down and began wiping the juice with a rag. As she cleaned, Judith smirked. "Hurry up, freeloader. You're lucky we even let you stay here." John, who was sitting on the sofa playing with his new phone, laughed. "Yeah, if it weren't for us, you'd be on the streets." Alice bit her lip to stop the tears from falling. She missed her parents so much. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine her mother's voice singing her to sleep. But now, there was no one to comfort her. After cleaning, Alice went back to the kitchen to wash the dirty plates. As she scrubbed, she thought about school. She used to love learning. Her teachers always said she was one of the smartest in her class. But after junior secondary school, Uncle James told her he could no longer pay her fees. "The money your parents left is finished," he had said, his voice cold. "You should be grateful we even took you in." But Alice knew the truth. John and Judith attended the best private school in the neighborhood. Just last week, Uncle James had bought John a new phone and Judith expensive sandals. Yet for her, there was nothing. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Alice lay on a thin mattress in the storeroom. The room was small and dark, filled with old boxes and broken things. The only light came from a small window high up on the wall. She hugged her knees and whispered a prayer. "One day my life will change. One day I will be happy." Outside, the sound of crickets filled the night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Alice closed her eyes and dreamed of a better future, one where she was loved, where she could go to school again, where she didn't have to feel like a burden. But for now, she was just the unwanted girl in her uncle's house. The morning sun peeked through the dirty windows as Alice swept the compound, her bare feet moving slowly across the rough concrete. At 20 years old, she felt like her life had stopped moving forward while everyone else's kept going. Her back ached from years of bending over to scrub floors and wash clothes. Inside the house, she could hear John snoring loudly in his room. He had graduated from university last year, but still slept all day like a baby. His certificates hung on the wall, collecting dust while he wasted his time sleeping, drinking, and causing trouble for Alice. Just yesterday, he had blamed Alice for losing his wallet when he was the one who left it at the bar. As usual, Uncle James had shouted at Alice without even listening to her side of the story. The kitchen door banged open, making Alice jump. Auntie Mabel stood there, her big body blocking the doorway. "Why are you so slow this morning?" she shouted, her face twisted in anger. "Hurry up and make breakfast before Judith arrives." Alice nodded quickly and rushed inside. Judith was coming home for a visit, which always made Auntie Mabel extra excited. As Alice peeled yams for porridge, her hands moved fast from years of practice. The knife slipped, cutting her finger slightly, but she didn't make a sound. She simply wiped the blood on her old dress and kept working. At noon, a shiny car pulled into the compound. Judith stepped out, looking like a movie star in her expensive dress and gold jewelry. Her high heels clicked on the ground as she walked proudly to the house. "Mum! Dad! Look what Desmond gave me!" Judith shouted as she entered, waving her left hand in the air. A huge diamond ring sparkled on her finger. Auntie Mabel screamed with joy and hugged her daughter tightly. "My baby is getting married!" And to a rich man from the oil company. "God has answered my prayers." Uncle James smiled proudly and patted Judith's back. "This is what happens when you raise your children well," he said, glancing at Alice washing dishes in the corner. Alice kept her head down, scrubbing the pots harder, trying to ignore the burning shame in her chest. While Judith had everything, education, a rich fiancé, a bright future, Alice had nothing but old clothes and blistered hands. The difference between them made her feel small and worthless. Would anyone ever love her? Would she spend her whole life cleaning after others? For weeks, Alice worked like a donkey, cooking, cleaning, running errands. She spent late nights carefully pressing Judith's expensive lace wedding gown and polishing her designer shoes, her fingers trembling with exhaustion as she handled the delicate fabrics she could never dream of owning herself. But on the wedding day, she wasn't allowed to sit with the family. Instead, she served food to guests in the hot sun, her old dress sticking to her sweaty body. 2 years passed after the wedding. Then one evening, the phone rang. Auntie Mabel answered it, her voice suddenly sweet like honey. "Yes, my daughter. Of course, don't worry, we'll send her immediately." She turned to Alice with a fake smile. "Judith needs help with her new baby. You're going to stay with her tomorrow." Alice's heart stopped. The spoon she was holding clattered to the floor. "But I don't want to go," she whispered, her voice shaking. The thought of living under Judith's roof, serving her cousin and husband every day, made her feel sick with shame. Auntie Mabel's smile disappeared like smoke. "You ungrateful girl. After all we've done for you? Pack your things now. You have no choice but to go." That night, Alice lay on her thin mattress, staring at the moon through the small window. She had packed her few belongings, 2 old dresses, a toothbrush, and a photo of her parents. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she wondered what life would be like in Judith's house. The next morning, Uncle James dropped her off at Judith's big house in his car. As he drove away without even saying goodbye, Alice stood at the gate, clutching her small bag. This wasn't just a new place, it was the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand. Alice took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The large house felt like a prison to Alice. Every morning, she woke up before the sun rose to start her endless chores. She cooked, cleaned, washed baby clothes, and took care of Judith's crying child, all without a single word of thanks. She had been living with Judith and her husband Desmond for 3 months now, and each day felt harder than the last. The house was big and beautiful, with shiny floors and expensive furniture. But Alice's small room was nothing more than a storage space with a thin mattress on the floor. Each day, the baby's cries echoed through the house at all hours, and Alice was always the one who had to wake up and tend to him. "Alice, the baby's crying again!" Judith's sharp voice called from the master bedroom. "Can't you hear?" Alice quickly wiped her wet hands on her old dress and hurried to the nursery. Little David was wailing in his crib, his face red and wet with tears. She picked him up gently, rocking him back and forth while humming a soft lullaby her mother used to sing to her. "You're taking too long." Judith appeared at the door, her silk nightgown shimmering under the morning light. "After you change him, make breakfast. Desmond likes his eggs soft." Alice nodded without looking up. She had learned that looking Judith in the eyes only made her angrier. One afternoon, Judith's friend Nancy came to visit. They sat in the living room, eating fried plantains and drinking expensive wine while Alice rushed around serving them. "Look at her," Judith said loudly, pointing at Alice, who was mopping the floor. 22 years old and still a nobody. No education, no husband, nothing." Nancy laughed cruelly. "At least she's useful as a house girl. Better than being useless, huh?" Alice kept her head down, but her hands shook as she squeezed the mop. The words cut deep, but she had learned long ago that crying only made things worse. The days passed in a blur of cooking, cleaning, and caring for the baby. Desmond never spoke to her, except to give orders, his voice always cold. Judith grew more demanding, finding fault with everything Alice did and treating her worse than a servant. One evening, after putting the baby to sleep, Alice finally had a moment to rest in her small room. Her whole body ached from the day's work. Just as she was about to lie down, the door creaked open slowly. Desmond stood there, his tall frame blocking the doorway. The smell of alcohol filled the small room as he stepped inside. "Alice," he whispered, his voice thick and strange. Alice jumped up, her heart pounding like a drum. "Desmond, what are you doing here?" She pressed herself against the wall, fear making her legs weak. He moved closer, his eyes dark and scary in the dim light. "Don't scream," he said, reaching for her arm. "Just be quiet and cooperate." When his hot, sweaty hand grabbed her wrist, Alice reacted without thinking. She yanked her arm free with all her strength and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Help! Someone help me!" The house erupted into noise. Lights came on. Feet pounded down the hallway. Judith burst into the room, her silk nightgown swirling around her. "What is going on here?" she demanded. Before Alice could speak, Desmond quickly lied. "She tried to seduce me. I came to check on the baby and she pulled me in here." Judith's face twisted in anger. She turned to Alice with fire in her eyes. "You wicked, ungrateful girl, after all we've done for you. No, he's lying!" Alice cried, tears streaming down her face. "He came into my room." He tried to— "Shut up!" Judith slapped Alice hard across the face. The sting brought fresh tears to Alice's eyes. "Pack your things and get out of my house right now!" With shaking hands, Alice threw her few belongings into her small bag. The same 2 old dresses, her toothbrush, and the photo of her parents. Judith stood over her the whole time, her breath coming fast with anger. "Go! Now!" Judith shoved Alice toward the front door. The night air was cold when Alice stepped outside. The heavy door slammed behind her with a final, terrible sound. She stood on the dark street, completely alone, holding her small bag against her chest. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the empty road. Alice stumbled along the dark road, her bare feet scraping against the rough pavement. The night air was cool against her tear-streaked face, and the shadows from the tall trees seemed to stretch like long fingers reaching for her. She clutched her small bag tightly to her chest, the only things she owned in the world, 2 faded dresses, a toothbrush, and the precious photo of her parents that she had managed to save. The moon cast a pale glow on the empty road. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, making Alice jump. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Where could she go? She had no money, no friends, and no family who cared about her. The thought made fresh tears spill from her eyes. Suddenly, the sound of an approaching car made Alice freeze. Bright headlights appeared around the bend, and for a moment she thought about running into the bushes. But her legs felt too heavy with exhaustion. The car slowed down as it neared her, then stopped. The window rolled down, revealing a young man with kind eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Why are you out here alone at this time of night?" Alice wiped her face quickly, unsure whether to trust this stranger. But something about his face, the way his eyebrows furrowed with worry, made her feel he might be different. "My name is Nelson," he said when she didn't answer. "Please, let me help you. It's not safe for a young woman to be walking alone at night." He paused, studying her tear-stained face. "You can come to my house for the night. My mother is there. You'll be safe, I promise." Alice hesitated. Every warning she'd ever heard about strangers flashed through her mind, but the thought of spending the night on the streets was even more frightening. Her whole body ached from walking, and the night was growing colder. Finally, she nodded and got into the car. The leather seats felt soft against her tired body, and the warmth from the heater made her realize how cold she had been. Nelson didn't ask any more questions as they drove, which Alice was grateful for. After about 20 minutes, they arrived at a big iron gate. Nelson pressed a button, and the gates swung open, revealing a beautiful mansion with lights glowing warmly from the windows. Alice's eyes widened. She had never seen such a big, beautiful house up close before. An elderly woman came to the door as they approached. She had a round, kind face, and wore a simple but elegant dress. "Nelson, who is this?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Mama, this is—" Nelson realized he didn't know Alice's name. "Alice," she whispered. "Alice was walking alone on the road at night," Nelson explained. "I couldn't leave her there." Mama Grace's eyes softened with understanding. She stepped forward and took Alice's cold hands in her warm ones. "Come inside, my child. You're safe now." The house was even more beautiful inside. The sitting room had comfortable sofas and family photos on the walls. The smell of something delicious cooking wafted from the kitchen. Alice stood awkwardly near the door, suddenly aware of how dirty her clothes were compared to this clean, elegant home. Mama Grace didn't seem to notice. "You must be hungry," she said. "Come, let's get you some food and a warm bath." That night, after eating the most delicious meal she'd had in years and wearing clean, borrowed pajamas, Alice slept in a real bed for the first time in her life. The soft mattress and fluffy pillows felt like heaven. The next morning, over breakfast, Mama Grace gently asked Alice to tell them her story. As Alice spoke, her voice shaking, Nelson's face grew dark with anger when she described how Judith's husband had treated her. Mama Grace's eyes filled with tears when Alice talked about being thrown out into the night. When Alice finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Mama Grace stood up and pulled Alice into a tight hug. "You should stay with us," she said firmly. "You don't have to go back to such a cruel family. We'll take care of you." Alice couldn't stop the tears that came then. For the first time in so many years, she felt truly safe and cared for. Over the next few days, Alice discovered what real family felt like. Mama Grace took her shopping for new clothes and showed her how to cook special family recipes. Nelson would tell funny stories at dinner that made Alice laugh until her sides hurt. One afternoon, as they sat in the beautiful living room, Nelson turned to Alice with a serious expression. "What do you want to do with your life?" he asked. The question surprised her. No one had ever asked her that before. Alice looked down at her hands, now clean and healing from years of hard work. I want to go back to school," she said softly. Then, with more confidence, "I want to study business management." Nelson's face broke into a wide smile. "That's wonderful. You're clearly very smart." He glanced at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Consider it done. We'll help you get back to school." Alice couldn't stop the happy tears. For the first time since her parents died, she felt hope blooming in her chest like a beautiful flower. Her future, once so dark and hopeless, now stretched before her full of possibilities. That night, as Alice lay in her comfortable bed, she whispered a thank you to God. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in many years, she looked forward to finding out. The classroom was quiet except for the sound of pens scratching on paper. Alice sat at her desk, her forehead slightly wrinkled in concentration as she wrote her final exam answers. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting warm squares of light on the wooden floor. 3 years had passed since Nelson found her crying on that dark road, and today marked the end of her business management studies. When the examiner called time, Alice carefully closed her exam booklet. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed it in. She had studied late into many nights, determined to make Nelson and Mama Grace proud of her. Now, as she stepped out of the examination hall, the weight of books in her bag felt lighter than ever before. Nelson was waiting outside the school gates, leaning against his car. When he saw Alice walking toward him, his face broke into a wide smile. "How was it?" he asked, taking her bag. I think I did well," Alice replied, her eyes shining with hope. She couldn't stop smiling. After years of being denied education, she had finally completed her studies. 2 months later, the results came. Alice stood frozen in the school courtyard, staring at her result sheet. Distinction. First class. Her vision blurred with happy tears. Nelson whooped with joy and lifted her up in a spinning hug, not caring who saw them. "Let's go celebrate," he said. That evening, Mama Grace prepared all of Alice's favorite dishes: jollof rice, fried plantains, and egusi soup. The house was filled with laughter and the smell of good food. Alice looked around at the smiling faces of the people who had become her family, her heart so full it might burst. As the years passed, Alice's small boutique business grew. She worked hard, waking up early and returning home late. Nelson would often stop by her shop with lunch, watching proudly as she dealt with customers and managed her staff. At night, he would massage her tired shoulders while she told him about her day. One quiet evening, Nelson led Alice to their favorite spot in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Fireflies had started to appear, their tiny lights blinking in the gathering dark. "Alice," Nelson began, his voice unusually serious. He took both her hands in his. "Do you remember the night I found you on the road?" Alice nodded. How could she forget? "That night changed my life," Nelson continued. "Watching you grow these past years, seeing how brave and kind you are." He took a deep breath and got down on one knee. "Alice, I've loved you for so long. Will you marry me?" Alice's hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the diamond ring sparkling in Nelson's hand. All the words she wanted to say got stuck in her throat, so she just nodded vigorously, pulling Nelson up to hug him tightly. Mama Grace, who had been secretly watching from the kitchen window, rushed out crying. "My prayers have been answered," she sobbed, hugging them both. That night, they celebrated with cake and music late into the night. The wedding was more beautiful than Alice had ever dreamed. She wore a white lace gown that flowed like water when she walked. Nelson looked handsome in his black tailored suit. Mama Grace cried throughout the entire ceremony, dabbing her eyes with a white handkerchief. A year later, Alice gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Their home became filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Every evening, Alice would sit on the veranda with Nelson, watching their children chase fireflies in the garden, her heart full of peace and happiness. Meanwhile, back at her uncle's house, they never bothered to know where Alice went all these years. They continued with their life. However, misfortune soon struck. Uncle James's once thriving shops suddenly burned to the ground one night, leaving him with nothing but debts. The insurance company refused to pay, claiming it was arson. Without money or income, they were forced to move to a single room in the slums. Judith's husband found a younger woman and divorced her, throwing her out of their home with nothing but the clothes on her back. He kept their child and cut off all contact. Judith, who had always been proud and spoiled, now wandered the streets looking for odd jobs. John became a cripple after a drunken accident where he fell into an open gutter. The doctors said he would never walk again. He spent his days lying on a thin mattress, the smell of alcohol still clinging to him as he cursed his bad luck. One hot afternoon, while Auntie Mabel struggled to cook their meager meal over a charcoal stove, she heard a familiar voice coming from a neighbor's television. She rushed outside, wiping her sweaty forehead, and peered through the neighbor's window. There on the screen was Alice, confident, beautiful, and successful, being interviewed about her chain of boutiques. The camera showed glimpses of her luxurious home, her handsome husband Nelson, and their two well-dressed children playing in a beautiful garden. Auntie Mabel's legs gave way. She collapsed to the dirty ground, tears streaming down her face. Judith came out and saw the television too. Her mouth fell open in shock. Inside their cramped room, Uncle James and John asked what was happening. When Auntie Mabel told them, they all sat in silence, the weight of their regrets pressing down on them. "This is our punishment," Auntie Mabel finally whispered, her voice breaking. "This is what we deserve for how we treated Alice." Back in her beautiful home, Alice tucked her children into bed. As she kissed their foreheads, she gave silent thanks for her blessings. Downstairs, Nelson waited for her with a cup of tea, just like he did every night. Alice looked around at her beautiful life, the family photos on the walls, the comfortable furniture, the love that filled every corner of their home. The painful memories of her past no longer hurt. They had become lessons that made her appreciate her present happiness even more. She had finally found the family she always wanted, and this time she knew it would last forever. If you enjoyed this story, please share your thoughts with us in the comments. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest stories.